So things are pretty bad. If you're teaching earth science at an Australian university, then chances are next year you've had units cut, and maybe even that you or your colleagues could be facing redundancy. If you're in industry, then chances are you've already been finding it hard to find skilled graduates. And in this current environment, you're expecting over the next few years that that's only going to get worse. This question of how do we attract the next generation of earth scientists is really, really pressing. I would contend that as a community, we don't have a well-developed strategy for how to effectively address this problem. Today, I'm unfortunately not going to come with any of those solutions, but I am going to come with a bit of data, a lot of questions, and a few examples of success that we can look to as we try to build that strategy for our community. As you can see, there's a large group of co-authors on this talk. So if you agree with anything that I say, then please share the credit around to all of us. And if you think any of it's rubbish, then please just lay that blame on me. So when I say that I don't think we have an effective strategy for how to address this problem, I'm certainly not saying that we're not trying to do anything about it. There are a lot of people in our community working really, really hard and running a lot of great programs. I've listed just a few of them across the top of the slide here to try to address this problem of low student numbers. And I'm not even suggesting that these programs are not effective. I've no doubt that if it were not for them, our student numbers would be even lower. But still, the situation that we find ourselves in shows that whatever we're doing is not enough. And when I talk to people in the geoscience community, a lot of people are really passionate about this. And a lot of people have a lot of ideas on why it is that young people are not choosing to study geoscience. And I've listed just a few of these ideas here. Things like that they need more, they just don't have enough exposure to earth science at school. People's attitudes to mining, that the kids, they consider it environmentally unfriendly. They want to be working in jobs where they're going to be helping the planet, and they don't see mining as that. Or for their parents, that they see the jobs as unstable and they're going to get laid off. That then sort of contradicting that then our numbers rise and fall with the boom and bust cycles, and then just as soon as we hit the next boom, then we'll see a rise in student numbers. Or the students' attitudes to earth science in general, that in school they see it as a bludge subject, they don't see the jobs as prestigious, and they think that we as geologists are all just old men with beards. Now, I think there's probably a lot of validity to a lot of these ideas, but I'd also say that there's also some contradictions between them. So the strategies that we design really have to be addressing what it is that are the student attitudes. And I would say as we try to build that effective strategy, and frankly, we don't have time to build strategies that are not effective, I would say, we're scientists. Let's be scientific about this. This is essentially a group of hypotheses. Instead of just picking the one that we like the best and putting our efforts behind that, let's collect some data. Let's be scientists. Let's figure out which of these hypotheses the data most strongly supports, and then put our efforts behind that to have the most effective possible solution. And with that in mind, I'm going to switch to the slide view where I talk through some of the data that we do have. So what do young people want? Well, these are the results of a survey of hundreds of Australian teenagers. And as you can see, the results are quite complex and diverse, because young people are complex and diverse, just like the rest of us. So we should expect that different strategies will target different people. Within the earth sciences, we have this really fantastic and valuable data set that's been collected by Dave Cohen from the AGC over a number of years, showing us our university enrolments. And this shows from 2003 through to 2012, 2013, we had a pretty steep increase in enrolments and then also retention of students from first year into second, third year and honours. And then since then, there's been a very sharp decrease in those numbers. This also shows the mineral and petroleum expenditure within Australia. And with the argument that this peak in enrolments correlates really closely, especially with the peak in minerals expenditure, and the argument that many of the students in this peak were enrolling in geoscience for the sake of these minerals industry jobs. But we can also compare the geoscience enrolments with enrolments in other fields, particularly, so we have here data from 2010 to 2019, particularly the natural and physical sciences that we are a part of. Those enrolments have increased over that time, and they show a very stark difference with our geoscience enrolments. On the other hand, enrolments in agriculture and environmental and related sciences have had a pretty similar trend to us. There's a peak in 2013, 2014, and a decrease since then. And maybe this tells us something, that maybe it's not only those minerals jobs that led to that early peak, maybe there are some other broader factors going on as well. We see increases in enrolments in IT and health, pretty steady enrolments in engineering. And I think it's also worth pointing out very strong enrolments in management and commerce. So we often hear this discussion that young people are interested in the environment and interested in saving the world and helping the planet. There are also a lot of young people who are interested in, in just having a good, stable job as well. We can see some examples on turning around enrolments within the earth sciences. So this is an example from Utrecht in the early 2000s. So a different time and a different place. So the results won't necessarily relate to us, but I think that the process they went through does. So they had low student enrolments. They commissioned consultants who were experts in this field to figure out how to turn that around. And those consultants surveyed students and found out that their main motivation was career prospects. And this was a big surprise to the department, because those academics had thought about what it is that they love about earth science, and that was that it's interesting and socially relevant. And so that's what they based their outreach on. Instead, the students wanted jobs, and they thought that the job opportunities in geoscience were poor. They were confined to research positions or oil companies where they were going to get laid off. So they changed their strategy to be more focused on information about career opportunities. But interestingly, it was very difficult for them to be able to do this, because the academics were really fixed in their views that no, surely what's motivating the students is it being socially relevant and interesting. So the consultants actually had to show videos of the interviews to the academics for them to kind of step back from their own ideas and agree to change this marketing strategy. But when they did so, they saw this big turnaround in student numbers, and student numbers started increasing a lot. So I think that's quite illustrative for us as well, just to try to step away from our preconceptions and be open to what the data actually say. So that's one success story. And now I want to introduce to you Narelle Underwood. Narelle is the Chief Surveyor of New South Wales. She's the Surveyor General of New South Wales, and she's also the Chief of a surveying task force in increasing student numbers in surveying. And she's seen really incredible success in that. So I wanted to introduce her so we can learn from some of her experiences.
Hi, Narelle, and thanks very much for agreeing to be part of this discussion. So I can imagine that surveying is in potentially even a more difficult situation than the earth sciences in terms of students at school just not having been exposed to it at all and having no idea, they're just not even considering to go into a surveying job. So can I ask, what was the situation in surveying that led you to decide that you needed to do something and set up some programs?
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity, Kate. I'm more than happy to share some of our experiences so that hopefully you guys can learn, and maybe there's some opportunities for us to partner on work once you guys have set something up. So surveying, let's be honest, pretty much nobody knows what surveyors do, and that's a big part of our problem. When we're trying to attract people, you talk about it, if you can't be it, if you can't see it, if you don't know it exists, you don't even know to look for it. And I'm someone who got into second year civil engineering before I'd even heard of surveying and changed across. So the problem we faced was our student numbers at universities were getting really low, to the point where universities were looking at whether it was viable to continue to run courses, which creates a massive problem because registered surveyors are the ones that deal with our property boundaries, and if we're not creating graduates, even though they're at low numbers, then the future of the profession and the integrity of our property boundaries goes under risk. Our TAFE courses had low engagement as well. So what we'd found was that lots of different industry people were doing their own little bits. But because it wasn't coordinated, we weren't sure what things were working. We'd have random surveyors going into schools or people going to careers advance. But the feedback we got was that, you know, it was quite often, so we've got an age profile problem. The average registered surveyor is 52-year-old male. So they weren't confident in going and speaking to a group of high school students, or they weren't being able to sell the message well enough. And so what we did was we got a group together, a committee with representatives across industry, government and academia to start putting a program together to coordinate those efforts and being able to track and understand. And I think one of the big things is that we got ourselves into this problem, so we're not necessarily going to be able to get ourselves out of it with the same thinking. So looking for external support from like marketing and advice to be able to talk about how we prepare and sell our message.
That sounds like a very familiar situation. So then what was the process that you went through to figure out what needed to be in these programs, what were the messages that were going to get across to students, and how to put it all together?
Yeah, so one of the things, in addition to bringing external support for like marketing advice on board, and part of their suggestions were to do a focus group. So the kids coming through that were doing surveying, why were they picking surveying? What had introduced them to surveying, and could we mimic that to increase the number of people? And so a couple of things came through is that lots of them had done work experience. So that was something that we decided was a really important program. And so we've put into place a consolidated place where any student can nominate that they want to do work experience, and the task force will find them a surveyor to do work experience. So making that process easy for them. We also know that, you know, they have to have access to information. They want to understand what careers it'll expose them to and that. And so being able to provide that information with snapshots of all the different careers that people could do brings that together. Careers events, so, you know, pre-COVID, going to face-to-face careers events and having activities so that people could engage with them. Because what we found was students might get engaged, but the parents don't know anything about it, and quite often kids bring their parents along to those events, and that was our opportunity to convince parents that it was a worthwhile career that their kid was going to be able to pursue and, you know, make a living from. And the other aspect we've really concentrated on is careers advisors. So when we first started, did a survey, and pretty much none of the careers advisors in our small list, I think it was about 100 careers advisors we had on our contact list, felt comfortable recommending surveying to a student as a future career option. So we created this database. We've been sending them information and support and activities through the years. And over that time, last year, that list has grown to, I think, 450 careers advisors now. You know, they move around. We've even got some interstate careers advisors on that list. And now more than half of them are more than confident in recommending surveying as a career, particularly in that they know how to identify what students are likely to find it interesting. So they're not just en masse recommending it. It's the students that it aligns with what they're interested in from a career perspective. Yeah,
that's great. So that's a fantastic statistic to have so many more careers advisors on board and so many more of them being able to advise students to go into surveying. Have there been any other ways that you've been able to assess the success of different programs, and are there any of the parts of the programs that you have found to be most effective so far?
Yeah, so we find that the careers, like the work experience, is a really key function. Careers advance is a bit hit and miss because it depends on who comes through at the time, and you're putting a lot of resources into 2 or 3 people sitting at a booth, and you might only speak to 5 kids during the day. So that one can be a little bit hit and miss. Making sure that we've got lots of content online, so that if kids get a flyer, they can go and get information after the event and sign up for that work experience and encourage it. But one of the other things we do is run a maths in surveying experience. So it's a one-day excursion where kids, we've linked practical activities using surveying equipment to the maths curriculum, and they get to come out and experience how maths actually gets used in surveying in terms of a real life. So when, you know, when kids put up their hand in class, like, why do we have to learn trig? Never ever going to use this. Nobody ever uses trig in their life. But it's like, well, remember that exercise where we worked out the height of a building based on a shadow and stuff like that? Like, there are actually practical applications for it, because that opens kids' eyes into that it's not just this random concept of math. It is applied. And as a student, you know, I did math at school. I didn't do terribly well at it, but I have to admit, once I got into the practicalities of surveying, it all just sort of fell into place. And so there are so many kids that struggle with those abstract concepts, and once you get in and play with it and actually have to apply it, that comes through.
That's great. And so have you seen an increase in numbers of students coming through and graduating?
Yeah, we have. We've seen all of the TAFE courses in New South Wales are fully subscribed for both full and part-time. There's actually waiting lists for people to get in there, and the numbers at university are also continuing to increase. I think the biggest thing is that we've been doing this for nearly 10 years now. It is not something that you're going to see instant results in 1 to 3 years. It's a long haul. The other part that we've also noticed is that because we were concentrating on year 10, 11 and 12 students, and that was our start because that was kind of picked as the easy wins, what we're seeing is that they've made decisions in year 9 and 10 and then the 11 and 12 that kind of have sent them down a path that preclude them from doing what we do. So what I've done a number of school visits or had schools come into our organisation, and it's the geography class. I'm like, cool, this is my opportunity to convince 20 kids that surveying is or geospatial is where they need to go. And then you find out the entire reason they picked geography was because it's on the same line as math, and they all hate math. And it's like, okay, that's not, you know, that thing. So part of what we've been doing, you notice my posters behind, is we're also starting now to look at younger kids. So that sort of 5 to 12-year-olds and being able to engage with them so that from a young age, they see that math is really important, that science is exciting, that being able to combine the environment with math and science, and that leads to a career where they can fly drones or be involved with planes and LiDAR and technology, engages their interest. So when the careers advisor in year 9 or 10 suggests, oh, have you considered surveying? They're like, oh yeah, I remember like hearing something about that when I was younger. So it's that idea of creating that pathway of engagement with them.
Yeah. That's all fantastic, Narelle. Sounds just fantastic programs, and congratulations on all your success with them. And I've no doubt it's a result of a lot of hard work. So thanks very much for sharing those insights with us. I think it'll be very useful for us, and certainly we hope that we can continue to work with you in the future. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Kate.
So with that as an inspiration, I think there are some practical steps we can take right now as a community to start collecting the data we need to make sure our programs are as effective as possible. For those in industry, as I said before, the key data point is really that estimate of industry needs. For those in universities, there are some key data we can collect easily, or we may even already have in our databases. So things like how many first-year students studied earth and environmental science at high school. This would be really informative for whether we target our outreach at schools that do or don't teach EES. The reasons for their first-year subject choices, adding a question or two into the unit evaluation surveys, I'm sure that we all already run, could give us some really useful insight into what's attracting our current students. And recording the retention rates from the different types of units that we teach, whether that's more vocational units or units that are just about the wonders of the earth sciences, that would give us some great insights into why those students stay. Narelle was just telling us about how in surveying, it's been important to show students the different types of jobs that they can do and to get those employers on board for work experience. Let's keep in touch with our graduates so that we can showcase the range of jobs that earth scientists actually do. And that of course includes mining, but it also includes environmental science, work in government, remote sensing, policy, geotechnical, all sorts of things. For those who are doing outreach, if you're not already, I'd encourage you to think about how you assess the effectiveness of those programs. And this can be really challenging, but without that, we don't know if we're just wasting our time with those programs, and we don't know where to put our future efforts. So we're also hoping to build a national committee that will help coordinate some of this data analysis. And also, ideally, taking that Utrecht example, actually get some money to commission experts to find out some of these answers for us. But even before that, I think as a community, as we've seen here today, there are absolutely steps that we can take right now to start figuring out these answers. So if you have some data, something you think is interesting, absolutely, I'll stick my hand up, send it to me, and I'll start doing this compilation, and let's see if we can turn this around.